Howdy folks, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. I've just gotten back from watching Avengers Endgame. It's well after midnight. That is a really long movie. And don't worry, I'm not going to spoil anything for the sake of those of you who haven't had a chance to go and see it yet, but I have seen it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. The amount of, that is just incredibly stupid moments in it were thankfully very, very rare. Most everything about it made sense, and it kept me guessing. Hardly anything really happened the way I was expecting it to. So yeah, 2 thumbs up from me for Avengers Endgame. Next up, the new kitten Akazuki, who's, you can hear, is actually sitting on the ledge right on top of my keyboard, playing with a bunch of spare change. I think the pound coin is about to go flying. Oh, there it is. There goes another one, and another one. Okay, great. She's now discovered that money makes an interesting noise when you knock it off a shelf. I don't know, I guess I should be grateful. Normally she's sitting on top of my mouse hand while I'm trying to use the mouse. So yes, life with the new kitten. She's now 13 weeks old. We've had her for exactly 1 week. She's become completely socialised with our eldest cat, Crystalline, which I was very surprised at. I thought if we were going to have a problem with any of the cats, it would be Crystalline. She's the oldest. The kitten is now playing with a toy tank. Sorry, this is just the sort of thing you're going to have to start getting used to from here on in. But yes, Crystalline. She's the oldest. She's the least receptive to change. It took her 3 years to accept me. 3 years of basically just being nice to her and being patient, but it paid off, and now she's absolutely devoted to me. But given what she's like, I was not expecting it to be easy to get her socialised with Akazuki. But it only took 4 days. It was amazing. The two of them are inseparable now, and I think Akazuki is going to be a great friend and playmate for Crystalline. Juicy, on the other hand, our other cat, the one that I actually expected to give us the least problems, is actually turning out to be the one most resistant to accepting the little kitten. And I think it's because she's feeling jealous and insecure. You see, the thing you may not understand about cats, unless you own cats, is that they pick their own human. So when Rita got Crystalline 9 years ago, Crystalline picked Rita as her human. She didn't have an awful lot of choice, there weren't any other humans around. But then a year later, when Rita got Juicy, Rita was already claimed by Crystalline, so Juicy didn't have her own human. Until Rita moved in with me, brought her 2 cats with her, and Juicy basically claimed me. As far as Juicy was concerned, I was now her human. And for the last 4 years, that's pretty much been the case. Until last week. Now there's a new kitty in town, and by necessity I've been having to spend pretty much all of my time with Akazuki, particularly when trying to socialise the other 2 cats with her, because we can't just shut them in a room and leave them to get on with it. It's not like when you have a new baby in the house. You can leave the baby alone at night in its cot. Yeah, it's going to wake up crying because it's hungry, or it has to be changed, or whatever. But it's not in any real immediate danger of dying because the other kids in the house are plotting to murder it in its sleep. That is actually a concern when you introduce a new cat into a household with other cats. So we're over that hurdle now with Crystalline. She and Akazuki are getting along fine. With Juicy, on the other hand, not so much. It's not just that she is upset with Akazuki, she's also upset with me. It's like she feels that I've betrayed her because I've been spending so much time with this new kitten. Because I have to spend so much time with this new kitten. And I've been going out of my way to try to show affection and attention to Juicy, but it's like she doesn't even want to know me anymore. So we've still got a long way to go with Juicy getting her socialised with this new kitten, and at the minute she's actually being quite aggressive with her. I mean, it's normal when you introduce 2 cats for them to hiss and spit at each other. but that's just cats working out their position in the social hierarchy. There are danger signs you can watch out for to see when a cat is actually being aggressive, and we're seeing all of those danger signs in Juicy. So this week, and maybe next week as well, however long it's going to take, we have to get Juicy socialised with the new kitten, and make her feel less insecure. And that's not going to be easy. It's going to mean a lot more sleepless nights. Ah, the joys of fatherhood. Anyway, enough about the cats. Oh, actually, no. There is one other thing that I wanted to say. It's probably not escaped your attention that I've been documenting the introduction of the new kitten into the household and putting the occasional cat bonus video up. Let me just stress that. Bonus video. In addition to the regular video content that I upload every day, other than Sundays. You're still getting World of Warships, you're still getting World of Tanks, maybe Horizon Zero Dawn, maybe Red Dead Redemption 2, maybe a bit of Subnautica Below Zero, whenever there's a fresh update out. You're still getting all of these videos every day, and then sometimes you're also, in addition to that, getting a pet video. I was not at all surprised to see that there are a huge bunch of you out there who do actually really enjoy these additional bonus pet videos. And that's fantastic. You're entirely welcome. Of course, not everybody enjoys watching the same sort of things, so there are going to be an equally large number of you out there who just aren't really interested in watching these pet videos. And that's fine too. It's not like you're missing out on anything, because they're bonus videos. You're still getting your World of Warships, World of Tanks, or whatever. But if you don't want to watch them, allow me to make a suggestion. Don't watch them. It's not like I'm clickbaiting you into watching them by putting them up with a World of Tanks or a World of Warships thumbnail on them. They're pretty quite clearly labelled as being pet videos. So why are you watching them and then complaining about them? Oh, Jingles, we didn't sign up to your channel to watch videos about cats. Then don't watch the videos about the cats. This is not rocket science. There is nothing hard about this. It should be pretty simple to understand. If you're clicking on a video called The Kitten Diaries that has a picture of a cat in the thumbnail, and then feeling cheated because it's not a World of Tanks or a World of Warships battle, in addition to the World of Tanks or World of Warships battle that you already got that day, then the problem, I'm afraid to have to tell you, exists between your keyboard and your chair. I'm doing my part here. All of my videos are clearly thumbnailed, they're clearly labelled. You're getting a gaming video every day, and occasionally you get some additional content. If you're clicking on that additional content and getting upset because it's not what you thought it was going to be, then allow me to make a couple of recommendations which will go some way towards enhancing your future YouTube viewing experience. It's become traditional amongst YouTube content creators to provide a couple of clues as to the kind of content that you can expect to see, which are usually hidden somewhere inside the thumbnail and the title of the video. I have every confidence that careful examination of both the title and the thumbnail of the video in question before exercising the use of your left mouse button will go some way towards ensuring a more peaceful and rage-free YouTube viewing experience in the future. And now with that out of the way, let's move on to something gaming related. I think it's about high time I addressed the elephant in the room, and of course I'm talking about the new aircraft carriers, although they're not that new anymore, in World of Warships. A lot of people are very upset, and if I'm being completely honest, I think a lot of people have fairly good reason to be upset. You see, the thing with this whole aircraft carrier rebalance, there were basically two things that Wargaming wanted to achieve with this whole aircraft carrier rebalance, and the two things that they wanted to achieve were kind of related. The first thing that they wanted to do was to reduce the ridiculous skill gap between those very few people who were actually pretty good at playing aircraft carriers and everybody else who were, well, basically shit. The second thing, which was kind of related, was that in order to do this, they wanted to make it easier to play aircraft carriers, while still retaining some kind of element of skill to differentiate the very good from the merely good and average. Now, I'm going to say something that's probably going to upset a lot of people, but hear me out, because there's more. I believe that wargaming has succeeded in those two respects. The problem, because there is a very big problem, is that I think wargaming should have had a third aim. As well as reducing the skill gap between the very good and everybody else, which they have done, and as well as making it more enjoyable and easier to play aircraft carriers, which I do believe they have done, they should also have ensured that it was fun to play against aircraft carriers. And this is the problem, particularly if you're playing destroyers. Now, there's a very high signal to noise ratio in any kind of discussion about aircraft carriers and World War Warships at the moment. If you were to just do a casual and cursory search on the various different forums and on Reddit on the subject of aircraft carriers, the amount of hyperbole and rage that you'll find, you'd think the sky was falling in, which I don't really think does the discussion any justice, because there are real and significant problems right now in World of Warships playing against aircraft carriers. Problems that don't really need to be exaggerated because they're bad enough on their own 2 feet. But there's a lot of hyperbole, there's a lot of exaggeration, and there's a lot of rage floating out there. And I find it can be very hard to cut through all of the bullshit and exaggeration to actually isolate what the real problems are. A lot of the complaints that you might find circulating on the forums and on Reddit by now are actually out of date, because credit where credit's due. Wargaming have been expending considerable amounts of time and effort to hotfix and patch any major and glaring issues as they appear. But there are still some very significant problems associated with playing against aircraft carriers, particularly in destroyers, which so far remain unresolved. And it can be difficult to articulate exactly what those problems are. Luckily, I was fortunate enough to come across an incredibly detailed and very, very long Reddit post that highlighted exactly what the current real issues are playing against aircraft carriers. Now, I'm not going to read you the whole thing because I'd be here all day. If you care about this subject and you do want to read the whole thing, I'll put a link down below in the video description. This was a Reddit post which at the time of recording this video is 2 days old, and it was posted by a user who goes by the name of USBC Nikita. Link down below in the video description. But to summarise the issues that he described, they are as follows, and I kind of have to agree with him. Now, just to put this into context for you, Nikita is a 60% win rating player who mostly plays Japanese torpedo boats. And before making this post on Reddit, he'd spent a month playing mostly nothing but Japanese torpedo boats in the current aircraft carrier heavy meta. What he found after this month-long experiment, well, the most surprising thing that he found was that his win rate actually went up. Now, let's not jump to any hasty conclusions. That in itself doesn't actually mean anything. In fact, he said himself, in the month that I've been playing almost nothing but torpedo boats, my win rate has actually gone up. An effect that I will conservatively attribute to random luck, but which could just as easily be related to the fact that because I am disproportionately likely to survive into late game relative to other destroyer players in the aircraft carrier heavy meta. In contrast, I am seeing other destroyers, allied and enemy, dropping like flies these days. Aside from anti-aircraft destroyers, it also doesn't seem to matter what flavour of destroyer you're playing. German, Russian, Pan-Asian, Royal Navy destroyers, they're all getting sent rapidly to the bottom during the early game. Wargaming apparently was highly alarmed by destroyer mortality as well, if recent buffs to air detection, nerfs to rocket squadrons, and bug fixes for high explosive dive bomber drop patterns, all in short succession, were any indication. Developer comments accompanying these changes noted that destroyers have been disproportionately affected in terms of damage suffered and survival rates. Survival rates which were already the lowest among ship classes in the game. He went on to say, to a degree, watching others play, I can see valid reasons why aircraft carrier mains are saying that the most important solution for destroyer captains is to get good. Getting good undoubtedly helps, and many captains continue to make quite basic, fatal mistakes. That said, the question we should be asking ourselves should be whether we have introduced a destroyer skill gap in an attempt to fix the aircraft carrier skill gap. Is it reasonable or healthy for the game if high-tier destroyer play requires a disproportionately higher skill floor than battleships, cruisers or carrier play in the same matchmaking bracket? What about the mediocre player, or the casual player who can't or won't memorise the radius of all high-tier radar, hydroacoustic search, hostile destroyer minimum detection range, keep track of the position of every potential detection threat throughout the entire game? Have we decided that destroyer gameplay has to be so newcomer unfriendly that many players will just abandon their first destroyer line in frustration upon hitting tier 8, rather than grind through zero damage game after zero damage game to learn the lesson the hard way? In going through all of the data that he'd accumulated in the month-long experiment that he conducted playing mostly just Japanese torpedo destroyers, he made a number of different assertions. The first one: consistently strong performance in torpedo-focused destroyers remains possible in the current meta for a skilled player. And it's that last bit that's important. For a skilled player. Assertion number 2. Survival in destroyers has become much more unforgiving, especially at higher tiers, which heavily penalises poor to average destroyer players. Carrier strikes themselves are often not the biggest threat in terms of damage. The biggest threat is plane spotting for enemy shells, with plane spotting also stacking with long-range radar. Starting from tier 7 and up, destroyer play in an aircraft carrier heavy match is considerably more difficult. Along with the carrier rework, the proliferation of radar ships due to the release of the US Navy light cruiser line, as well as the high presence of premium tier 9 ships with strong radar, Missouri, Kronstadt, Alaska, all of these things go to make high-tier destroyer play even riskier compared to a pre-rework environment that was already unfriendly to new or poor destroyer players. He found himself that he began regularly dying in the majority of his destroyer games as soon as he hit tier 8 and up, until he started changing his tactics. More on that later. But of course the reason that he kept dying was because of the aircraft carriers. He found that the fundamental issue was the spotting provided by carrier aircraft. He found that he was actually far less scared of the actual carrier's attacks than he was of the hail of shell fire from enemy battleships and cruisers that accompanied being spotted by aircraft. The carrier player didn't even have to make a single attack run to force him to run at full speed for the rear, and often would fly ahead, drop a fighter consumable just ahead of him, which effectively acted as a deployable radar that kept him spotted for the next 20 seconds, subjecting him to yet further shell fire from enemy battleships, cruisers, and other destroyers. The bigger problem, however, is that the detection threats stack with enemy carriers. Both the carrier aircraft and radar are on-demand detection for an enemy team. Radar can pinpoint you for the aircraft planes to maintain detection. Similarly, even a brief flyover by carrier planes can announce your presence for an enemy cruiser, to then spotlight you with radar. And, of course, fighter consumables also act as a sort of deployable radar, as already mentioned. The second issue was that survival in a destroyer on low health is simply no longer possible in the new aircraft carrier meta. I've featured plenty of replays in the past where destroyers that have been reduced to a couple of hundred health have managed to stay alive and carry the game. That is just not possible anymore. The response time of aircraft carrier attack squadrons at higher tiers is far faster than your ability to reposition. It no longer generally matters if you survive a destroyer duel or a YOLO torpedo attack with a fraction of health remaining, because even a semi-competent aircraft carrier player will have no problem finding you with an attack squadron, perma-spotting you for the next 20 seconds with a fighter consumable, and finishing you off with rockets. The third conclusion that he came to: it's impossible to avoid detection by aircraft in the long term while remaining useful to your team. And if you want to maximise your impact on the outcome of the battle, you're also going to have to expose yourself to radar. To summarise, playing safe in a destroyer is not a winning strategy. A lot of the time people will just say in response, well, you just have to get good, or you just have to find anti-aircraft cover. And yeah, sure, if you want to stay safe from aircraft, then stick close to a Massachusetts, or a Worcester, or a Minotaur. But that puts you at the mercy of your teammates. Remember, we're talking about solo play here. You can't guarantee that that Worcester or that Minotaur are going to go anywhere that's going to be useful for you. And let's say you're following a Massachusetts or an Iowa around. Yeah, sure, they've got very strong anti-aircraft fire, but they're still attractive targets for carriers. If you're chugging around the edge of the map, tied to the coattails of an Iowa or a Massachusetts, and the enemy carrier, or somebody, well, anybody, spots that Massachusetts or that Iowa, that's, as far as anybody can tell, a lone, isolated battleship. Strong anti-aircraft fire or no, that's a very juicy target for a carrier. And when they come over to make their attack run on that battleship, you're going to get spotted too. Carrier doesn't even have to know that you're there until they make the attack run. At the point where you get spotted, the carrier isn't even attacking you. But remember, it's not the direct attacks from carriers themselves that are the major source of destroyer players' problems. It's the getting spotted, and the hail of shellfire that accompanies it from enemy battleships, cruisers, and other destroyers. Fourth conclusion: objective-focused gameplay just isn't worthwhile. The second a destroyer touches an objective, their near exact position is immediately announced to the entire enemy team. Early capping is generally no longer possible. Popping a smokescreen to avoid being spotted by aircraft just announces your general location and keeps you fixed in one nice spot for torpedoes and radar. In summary, team objectives are now pretty much a side consideration. The impact that you're going to have in a destroyer now comes from ship damage and kills, not from capping, and certainly not from scouting. Conclusion number 5. Your game experience is heavily dependent on the enemy carrier player's priorities. And this is true for everybody, not just destroyers, although I'd argue that it affects destroyers more. You get some carrier captains who just aren't confident in their ability to hit a rapidly evading destroyer. And aside from dropping a fighter consumable on top of you, which is bad enough, but other than that, they'll generally leave you alone. On the other hand, you also get aircraft carrier players who take some kind of perverse pleasure in hunting down destroyers. And thanks to the fast response time of aircraft, which is significantly faster than your ability to reposition, if you get one of those on the enemy team, you're not going to have much fun. If that does happen, all that you can really do is drive your destroyer into the heart of your team's anti-aircraft defences and just empty the other guy's hangar. It's not a lot of fun, and it's certainly not very profitable for you in terms of credits or experience, but it does actually have a positive impact for your team, because while the enemy carrier's throwing his aircraft away just trying to put you on the bottom, he's not hurting anybody else. It's not all bad news, however. Conclusion number 6. Team anti-aircraft blobbing is a double-edged sword that actually can work in a torpedo boat's favour. If there's one thing that he loves to see in his torpedo reload booster Yugumo, it's battleships travelling in tight packs. Lemming trains with 3 to 5 enemy battleships moving in concert with battlecruisers and cruisers are a regular sight now. They call it the AA Blob. Consequently, he has had hilariously successful Japanese destroyer games in the presence of carriers. In a number of the matches, he landed torpedoes on literally every single enemy battleship over the course of the game. If blobbing is now a regular fixture of games, then your ability to deal irreparable hit point loss to their battle line can be a decisive factor. Sometimes you're even treated to the sight of the entire enemy battleship line in full retreat, having completely lost their nerve after withstanding a 16 torpedo salute that cost them their Worcester, left their Missouri at low hit points, and took a mean chunk out of their Montana's bow. Remember, with high-tier Japanese 12-kilometer torps, Japanese torpedo destroyers retain the ability to outrange radar while remaining within torpedo range. If you position yourself well at the leading edge of the enemy advance, you can wreak absolute havoc with some well-placed torpedoes. That said, blobbing up does remain a double-edged sword. In other games, it's your team that's blobbed and gets annihilated by torpedoes. Alternatively, Your allied blob fights from too far to the rear to have any game impact. Conclusion number 8. Subjectively, destroyer play has definitely become more stressful. Overall, I have still continued to enjoy destroyer games, but the variance to my enjoyment factor has increased. With the increased death rate associated with current destroyer play, the natural corollary is that it takes more mental effort to survive. He still has great games that have him cackling at his monitor as the whole enemy fleet disappears in eruptions of water, but he also has games in which he's totally and completely shut down as punishment for a single misstep. Fear of this happening now accompanies each game and forces him to exercise far more intense game awareness than ever before. As a result, the current state of the game when it comes to torpedo-focused destroyers really isn't one that readily lends itself to long experience farming sessions. Not because you can't be successful if you're skilled, but because the effort is just too great to sustain for more than a few games. And keep in mind that this is his reaction as one of the better torpedo destroyer captains in World of Warships. You can only imagine what the experience of the average player is upon finally sailing their stock Kagero into battle for the first time. He summarises his experience thus. He's confident that consistently good performance in torpedo-focused destroyers remains possible in the current aircraft carrier gameplay meta. That said, he's less confident that it translates to a consistently enjoyable gameplay experience, particularly for the typical captain. In the end, it's this second factor that matters most. World of Warships is a game meant to be played for enjoyment, and while there are people out there who love the Dark Souls series, most players aren't looking for that kind of experience when they take their destroyers out of port. If you are determined to brave the open ocean beneath hostile skies, however, then he hopes that the insights he's provided prove useful to you. And once again, if you're interested, I do encourage you to check out the link in the video description and read the whole post. Personally, I'd also add that while this is obviously primarily focused towards how it feels to play a destroyer in general, and a torpedo destroyer in particular, in the current aircraft carrier meta, pretty much everything that he's described also applies to cruiser and battleship captains to varying degrees. So, as a sort of grand summary, World of Warships wanted to make playing carriers more accessible, more enjoyable, and reduce the skill gap between the very best aircraft carrier players and everybody else. And they have definitely succeeded in doing that. But what should probably have also been one of their aims was to make sure that playing against the aircraft carriers was equally enjoyable and rewarding. And I don't think you'll find there are too many people out there who would claim that they have been equally successful at doing that. I know for a fact that they are trying, but how they're eventually going to achieve it, if at all, is anybody's guess. There have been a number of suggestions floated around, and I'm sure, and in fact I invite you to make your own suggestions in the comments down below. One of the biggest complaints is counterplay against an attacking aircraft squadron. At the moment, it's completely passive, aside from actively evading the famous just dodge tactic. But actually shooting down any attacking aircraft is an almost completely passive experience. All you do is choose whether or not to reinforce one sector of anti-aircraft fire, and the means by which you do it, which I know is something that they're working on, but at the moment it's kind of clunky, and while it does increase the damage that you're doing to incoming attack aircraft, thanks to the way those aircraft handle taking losses, it's not actually going to prevent you from being hit. You see, what happens, let's say for example you're being attacked by a squadron of 12 aircraft split into 3 flights of 4. The first 4 aircraft in the first attack wave drop down for their attack run. Well, let's say they start getting hammered by anti-aircraft fire and 2 of those aircraft get shot down. You might reasonably expect that instead of facing an attack from 4 torpedo bombers, you're now only facing an attack from 2. This is what would have happened prior to the aircraft carrier rework, but what happens now is that 2 fresh aircraft from the other 8 following the attack wave in drop down and take up the positions of the 2 aircraft that you shot down. So you still, despite having shot down 2 of the 4 aircraft that are actively engaged in attacking you, you're still getting attacked by 4 aircraft. The only practical effect of shooting down any aircraft in the first attack wave, assuming you're lucky enough to shoot any down in the first place because of how, well, easy it is to actually dodge flak bursts, but the only practical effect is that you're reducing the number of aircraft available for the second and third follow-up attacks. You're still getting hit by the full complement of aircraft, regardless of how many you've shot down in the first wave. So I've heard a number of suggestions as to how to deal with this, although the most obvious suggestion to me would appear to be stop doing that. I mean, if 4 aircraft are committed to the attack and 2 of them get shot down, then only 2 of them should survive to deliver the attack. What the other 8 circling overhead are doing is their business, but, well, apparently this just seems too obvious. Who knows, maybe Wargaming are tinkering with this idea, but hey, you never know. Another idea that I've heard is, and this idea appears to be gaining quite a bit of traction, is to make anti-aircraft fire more skill-based and active. Rather than just hoping that your raw damage per second from your anti-aircraft guns is going to be enough to shoot something down, or just hoping that the enemy carrier player is going to blunder some of his aircraft right into your flak bursts, give the defending player something to actually do. Make player skill a part of the equation. I mean, the carrier has to display some element of skill to get a successful attack off. Surely the player defending against the air attack should at least have the option of employing some kind of skill to defend against the attack. Now that sounds like a great idea, but personally I think it's absolutely terrible. And I'll explain why, but luckily I don't have to, because USB-C Nikita also agrees with me, and he explains why this is a bad idea in far, far better terms than I possibly could. He makes the argument, and it applies to everybody, not just destroyers, but if you need to aim or micromanage your anti-aircraft on top of everything else that you have to do, then forget it. Fundamental game mechanics would need to be reworked. All weaponry still points to where the camera is pointing. So if you're trying to gun down an enemy destroyer while you're fighting off an air attack from the opposite side, it would be complete chaos. Destroyers are the closest to a MOBA like League of Legends that World of Warships gets. A battleship might have the luxury to manage his anti-aircraft fire between salvos. Meanwhile, if you're firing your 100mm guns every 2.5 seconds because you've got adrenaline rush going, while dodging torpedoes, while toggling your anti-aircraft fire, while hitting your speed boost once you've cleared the island, while deciding whether or not to repair that fire, while monitoring your distance from the enemy destroyer, while trying to launch your torpedoes on a lowdown between main battery volleys, forget it. It just isn't happening. And I'm inclined to agree. I mean, you know, your mileage may vary. Maybe you have the reflexes of a rattlesnake on crack, but there are situations that happen often, not just in destroyers, and battleships and cruisers as well, where there's just so much going on around you, so much that you have to pay attention to, that often I don't even have the time to toggle my anti-aircraft sectors, and if it got more complicated than that, then I probably wouldn't even bother. Of course, I accept that my experience might be very, very different to many of yours. Nevertheless, I'd be very interested to hear what you lot have to say about this whole situation, because it wouldn't surprise me if certain Wargaming employees were paying close attention to the comments section of today's Mingles with Jingles. So here's your chance. Get it off your chest. Let's hear what you have to say on this subject. And on that bombshell, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you all had a great weekend, and I hope it's provided something that might stimulate some kind of conversation. Productive conversation. You never know your luck. Down below in the comments section. It's customary for me to end these videos by saying take care and I'll catch you next time, and while I am going to say that, in fact I just did, I'm also going to finish this week's episode with some footage of me finding the I have just lost all control of my legs button on Akazuki's neck. And while you're enjoying that, take care, and I'll catch you next time. That's the spot. Yeah, Daddy found the spot. Yes, he did. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, human. Yeah, that's the spot right there. Oh, yeah. Oh. Yeah, I'll tell you when you can stop. Oh,